This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
Hi, how you doing? Good. Thanks, Caleb. So, before we get going, I just want to say to you guys, thanks for what you do. I listen to your podcasts. I have some friendships with some of you, and my parents go here. And for me, as one who has wrestled with faith a fair amount, it's places like Narrate that validate Jesus and his followers for me. So with that said, thanks a lot. As Caleb mentioned, we're going to talk about the kingdom of God today. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the text and discuss what Jesus means by the kingdom of God, I want to share a couple of personal stories. And I'm not one to relate everything to myself, because I'm one out of 7 billion people in the world. I'm not the center of everything. But I do think that this morning, a couple of stories from my experiences in South Korea will segue us into more universal experiences that are relevant to you guys. So here we go. In May of 2009, I graduated college, and through a series of unfortunate circumstances, ended up as a 23-year-old moving back in with my parents. Eating mom's food and having mom do laundry for me, which was just grated against my skin because I just wanted to be independent, you know? And after several months of being there, I was just not too thrilled about the situation. Nothing against my parents. They were extremely gracious and generous. But an opportunity crossed my path to get out of the situation I was in, and that was to teach English in South Korea to elementary students, generally like 4th, 5th grade. At first I was hesitant, but after a few weeks of thinking about it, made a decisive yes, and within 6 or 7 weeks was flying from small town Helena to a metropolitan area of 6 million people in South Korea. And, you know, it's overwhelming. I've traveled abroad a bit before that, but those trips were usually just 2-3 weeks, maybe a month, and you're with a bunch of, you know, other Christian nerds with the same shirt on, and you just feel totally weird in the airport. And you are weird. You know, you don't feel weird, you are weird. Let's keep it real here. You know, so everyone looks like me, and everyone speaks the same language as me. But this time, it wasn't, and also, you know, you have a guide. This time, I didn't have a guide, and I was going alone, and it was for a couple of years. And so, you know, it's a bit overwhelming. And I remember being picked up from the airport from this guy I didn't know, and I'm terrible at small talk, so I was already kind of having a panic attack that I had to small talk with this guy for 30 minutes. But, you know, driving through the town, or rather the city, you know, you're seeing a bunch of signs in a language that you can't even read, and there's a bunch of people that don't look like you, and you don't know where you're at in town, and so it's a bit overwhelming. I remember this, not necessarily the first night, but the second night I laid down. I stayed in a hotel for a couple weeks when I first arrived. And I laid down thinking to myself, like, what did I get myself into? But things got better. After a few weeks, things rapidly get better. And really was starting to started to kind of find my knack with teaching those little kids, you know, the difference between are and is. And started to really connect with the students. They're super cute, super studious. You know, they fit that stereotype of, you know, nerdy Asian kids. That is not an ethnocentric. I'm a nerd as well. I'm just a nerdy white kid. But anyway, they're awesome kids. And I remember one day, one of my students, her name was Yeonju. She came up to me like it was right before class and said, "Hey, teacher, I have a dentist appointment, and so my mom and my sister are going to pick me up a little bit early before the class ends." And sure, that's great. And then she said, "Well, I really want you to meet my mom and my sister." And sure, that's awesome. And so we go through the class, and 10 minutes before the class ends, I get the knock on the door and just put pause in the classroom, tell the kids, you know, don't talk, don't breathe, don't do anything, okay? And I walk outside, and Yeonju is a translator between me and her mom, and, it's the typical small talk. What's your name? My name's Josh. Where are you from? I'm from the United States. Oh, really? Which state? I said, Montana. She said, I never heard of that state. I said, that makes sense because there's like 35 people there. So, I totally understand you. And during this conversation, little sister in mom's arms, who's about 2 years old probably, just starts to sob and whisper into mom's ear what the problem was. And mom just starts to laugh, and mom shares with Yeonju the story, and Yeonju starts to laugh as well, and I'm just kind of standing there puzzled because I don't know what's going on. And let me give you a little bit of context before I share what I'm about to say next. In South Korea, 99% of the country is South Korean. Okay, so the other 1% is from other areas of the world, and mainly from like China, Japan, the Philippines, and so there's barely any people that look like us there. And so anyway, there's this problem going on, and the little sister's crying about it, and then all of a sudden, and then Yeonju translates for me what's going on. She says, oh, in the sweetest but at the same time kind of condescending tone, she says, teacher, my sister is crying because your eyes are blue and they are very scary. And so I thought to myself, well, that's pretty funny, but like, does that mean I'm like the Marilyn Manson of South Korea? So that's one experience. A few months down the road, I met a girl that was about my age, a Korean girl, and she was an English teacher, and so, hey, that's great, we can talk, and so there was connection there. And we went to coffee one time, and one thing that I was really excited about is she was a Christian, so I really wanted to get to know, what makes Korean Christians tick, and so we met for coffee once, and we met for coffee a second time. And after coffee that second time, she said, you should come to church with me sometime, which at that idea, I was totally elated, though I shouldn't have been. So the next Sunday, I meet her at a subway station, and we're on our way to church. And I have to ask her, first off, I don't know if I'm going to be able to understand, like, a really long monologue. Like, my Korean had gotten a little bit better at that point, but not that good. And she says, don't worry, I'll translate for you. It'll be fine. So, okay, great. Now, again, remember, there's few people that look like me there. And so we get to this church, and, I'm a human being. I like a little bit of attention from people, but, too much is no, And anyway, so we get to this church, and I'm confident I was the first American Caucasian person to ever go to this church, because seriously, whenever we walk in the lobby, and there's like 300 people at the church, there are like 50 people like right on me, and personal space just doesn't roll in Asia. And so, there's like 50 people, and they're like taking pictures and asking questions and like walking up to me like, hey, I got to get a picture with you, man. You're doing the little selfie thing. And I was just like, just squirming at this point. It gets worse. Then you would think, whenever I ask my friend, okay, can you translate for me? You would think, we'll sit in the back and she'll just lightly speak the translation to me. Oh no, we sat right in the middle of the sanctuary, and she wasn't speaking like 100% voice, but it was loud enough to be distracting, and so everyone's like looking at you all the time. And, like I said, they're pretty excited that there's an American guy going to their church, so sometimes like people in front of us would they would look back and like give you this like, dude, you're doing a good job going here. And I'm just squirming in my seat at this point. And then the speaker, the first PowerPoint comes up, and my friend translates it for me, and it says the history of redemption from Adam to, Revelation of John. And so that's a lot of material. So either it's going to be like really action-packed for like 30 minutes and super highlighted, or it's going to last like a few years kind of a thing, Well, I'm not exaggerating. The message lasted 6 hours. And there were intermissions. I had found out there would be intermissions, and so I'm just like developing this white lie plan to get out during the first intermission, And then the speaker, he gets up and he's like, oh yeah, so God is redeeming people from all nations, from Korea, like us, and from people, and from countries where this guy comes from. And he like points at me and everyone's like, awesome, you know, I'm dying. And the first intermission, I just told my friend, I was like, you know what, I didn't know this was going to last that long. I've got to meet a friend at 5, bye, and just walked out kind of a thing. And I didn't have to meet a friend at 5, so I'm confessing to a white lie. But I did call her and say, hey, we should hang out, because I just told another friend that I needed to leave to hang out with you. And she's like, okay, sure. So that kind of canceled out the white lie. But anyway, there were tons of fun experiences there, and especially with the kids. They were super funny, and I loved to make fun of them, but they made fun of me too. You know, it was a blast. It was almost on like a daily basis. We had these fun experiences. But with the adventure and fun can come some struggle. Like I said, South Korea is 99% Korean, and that's in contrast to the U.S., and I'm sure Montana's a bit different. But the U.S. is 65% of European descent. So you've got some diversity there, and then within the 65% of European descent, you know, an Italian person is going to look different than someone from Ireland. Well, there, I was just incredibly unique. And not only was I incredibly unique in how I looked, but, you know, my worldview and my language skill made me particularly unique, and so you have these moments of just incredible loneliness. And I had a couple friends that I could really connect with, but you can't hang out with 2 friends all the time because you'll exhaust that relationship and it might be damaging. So in a metropolitan area of 6 million people, during that time I felt there were moments where I had never felt more lonely. And there were other things that go on there. You know, let's keep it real. Like there was some temptation there. And you know, things ended up being okay, but that doesn't mean it was easy. And there was some, just like in America, there was some racism there. And, you know, as soon as your Korean gets better, you start to hear about what people are saying about you. So there was some struggling there. Now, are those things that bad? No, they're not that bad. And I feel like I've personally gone through things that were more difficult to handle. Have you all gone through more difficult things? I'd assume so. But I think the difference this time is when I was back home in the U.S., whenever I was struggling with something, I would just kind of analytically think about how can I remove it from my life. Whereas this time, I didn't have the most ideal exit strategy. It just wasn't practical for me to leave. And so it's just like, well, my circumstances aren't going to change, so I need to change the way I'm thinking about things. Now, it doesn't mean that I wanted to change my perspective necessarily. Maybe perspective is just like a Band-Aid that doesn't actually heal the wound. It just kind of covers it up for a while. But I really needed to experience joy that can be had in Jesus in South Korea, just as I had it in my best moments of life back in the U.S. Now, those were my circumstances that got the wheels turning for thinking about what the kingdom of God is. But I want to ask you guys, what are you dealing with? Is there strife in the workplace or with, you know, other relationships that you have with your spouse, with your parents, with your kids? Is your patience waning as you wait for something? You're waiting for that job promotion, that spouse, or that child, and it's just not working out. Are you financially strapped? And it's not that you're living that frivolous of a life, it's just that you're a single parent with a couple of kids, and it's just money's tight. There's barely any margin. What are you dealing with? And I sincerely ask that question, like think about something in these coming minutes, like what's bothering you? And maybe your life is pretty good. Any conversation I've had with you Narrate people, you guys are awesome and you're remarkably mature and wise, and so you handle life well. But there's got to be something that isn't perfect, right? There's always room for improvement. What's going on? I would argue that Jesus invites us to experience the kingdom of God and therefore experience joy regardless of what our circumstances are. So we're going to crack open a text. We're going to look in the book of Luke, chapter 17. And it's an interaction between some Jewish leaders and Jesus a couple thousand years ago. It says, "One day the Pharisees asked Jesus, 'When will the kingdom of God come?' And Jesus replied, 'The kingdom of God can't be detected by visible signs. You won't be able to say, "Here it is," or "It's over there," for the kingdom of God is already among you.'" Now hold on to that word "among." We're going to get back to it in a minute, but let's think about the context for a second. Jewish people, several thousand years before this interaction, God had approached a man by the name of Abram, and he said, "If you leave the life that you now know and follow me, and then I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars, and I, through you, will be a blessing to the entire world." They're going to be a blessing to everyone, billions of people. Now think about the thousands of years after that promise was made. There had been oppression after oppression and regime after regime that were crushing Israel. Okay? So you got to be thinking like, okay, God, when's this promise going to come through? And, the Pharisees, they're the ultimate tool bags. And that's kind of a joke, but it's also like they were incredibly corrupt. But in this moment, whenever they're asking Jesus this question, you sympathize with what they're saying, right? Like, you gave us this, or God gave us this promise, and you're this new hotshot rabbi, new kid on the block. What's your answer? When's this promise going to be fulfilled? When will the kingdom of God come? And Jesus says, well, you won't be able to say, "Here it is," or "It's over there." The kingdom of God is already among you. Now think about, what are some characteristics of the kingdom of God when you think of it? Like for me, personally, I think, well, it's a trust that justice will prevail. And the Jewish people had not seen much justice in the past several thousand years. Rather, they had seen a lot of oppression, right? And it's a trust that truth will reign. I mean, the Jewish people had their problems, no doubt, especially with, such corrupt leaders like the Pharisees. But compare their worldview with the deities that were surrounding them, where there's child sacrifice going on and a bunch of human mutilation, okay? So you got to think like, man, if everyone just served the Hebrew God, if the Hebrew God could be, through us, a blessing to everyone, then all of this crap would not be going on, right? Also, I think within the kingdom of God, there's got to be some selflessness there. And they hadn't seen selflessness. They had seen empires crush them and use them for their own purposes. Purity. And not just on the sexual level, but also purity in like whenever I approach someone, I'm not thinking, okay, how can they benefit my cause? But rather, how can I benefit their cause? And here's the kicker for me, peace. That whenever you lay down at night, if the kingdom of God exists and it's true and it's real, I can lay down at night and think to myself, things are going to be okay. My heart and mind are at peace. Now, had the Jewish people experienced this? No. And so they asked Jesus, when will this come? And Jesus says, well, you can't say it's here or it's there. Some people would say, well, maybe it was Jesus. Maybe he's referring to himself as the kingdom of God. But that couldn't be the case, because if it was, you could say, the kingdom of God, it's over there. His name is Jesus. So he cancels himself out at that point. The word among in this text is particularly special. I'm not one to translate a passage of the Bible and hinge all of the translation on one word. That's uber dangerous. I'd rather take it like a major concept that takes up a big chunk of the Bible. But in this situation, I think it's entirely crucial, and I think it's intellectual. It has an intellectual integrity, too. The word among in this text is translated from the Greek word entos, which in its purest translation means within. Jesus uses the same word a few chapters earlier than this in the book of Luke when he says, the Pharisees, they're clean on the outside, But entos, within, they're dirty. And he uses an analogy of like dishwashing, washing a cup. He says, you got to clean outside the cup, but if you don't clean within, entos the cup, what's the point? So what if Jesus in this text is not saying the kingdom of God is already among you, like it's not him and it's not some kind of like geeky Star Wars force that floats around. He's really saying the kingdom of God is within you. Now that's really comforting, but it's really frustrating too. Because if the kingdom of God is within me, then why am I not experiencing it? Why am I wrestling so much with daily life? Jesus doesn't say much after this. He just says, well, it's among you. All right, I've got to go. Which is so frustrating. But he tends to do that quite a bit. It seems to be the trend. Maybe Jesus values wrestling with the text and wrestling with who he is and what he really taught. So Jesus didn't say much about it. And personally, I've researched a lot of what different Bible teachers that are remarkably brilliant say about it, and I couldn't find much material. And maybe you divine conspiracy Dallas Willard scholars could help me out, but I'm not a Dallas Willard scholar, so I don't know what he says about it, and so I just couldn't find anything. But several months ago, I was reading in the Bible, and I read a particular text that was just really illuminating about the kingdom of God being within you. It's actually 1 Corinthians 13. Now, when you think of 1 Corinthians 13, what do you think of? You think of like Christian weddings? Or you go to the Christian bookstore, in the Valentine's Day season, and you see a bunch of Valentine's Day cards, and it's such a narrow interpretation of this Bible. Like, there's more to it than, a PowerPoint at a Christian wedding. It says love is patient and love is kind and so on. The writer of this text, the Apostle Paul, whenever he wrote it, these few verses are nestled between a couple of chapters that have to do with spiritual gifts. And he said, regardless of how gifted you are, if you don't exercise those gifts in love, then your gifts are worthless. The work you're doing is pointless. So that's one interpretation, but isn't love applicable in every area of life, in every situation, in every circumstance, and in every single relationship you have? I would have to say so. I mean, love is it's there. It exists in every situation. Let's read the text really quick. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, and endures through every circumstance. Let's look through a bullet point definition of what love is. Love is patient. So whenever your patience is waning with someone or with God, love, and when it's exercised in its purest form, doesn't allow for this wrestling with impatience. Love is kind. Love is not jealous or proud. Or in other words, it doesn't compare itself to others. And so whenever you're interacting with someone who appears to be less successful than you, you're not proud about that. Or whenever you interact with someone who appears to be more successful than you, you're not jealous about that. Love doesn't allow those emotions to happen. Love isn't rude. It's not demanding of its own way. Now, think about your interactions with God. I know for me, things maybe are getting better, I don't know. But for a while there, it was just like, God, it's my way or the highway. Well, what if loving God means not demanding your own way toward him? Love doesn't rejoice in the failure of others. Or again, love isn't jealous or envious. Love never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always faithful. And it endures through every circumstance, regardless of what you're going through. Now, as you struggle with your circumstances, whatever they might be, whatever's bothering you, whether it's really bad or it's not that bad, whatever, What are the emotions you feel whenever you're struggling with that circumstance? Is it impatience? Are you unsatisfied with the way things are going or with your personal successes? Are you irritable? And you justify your irritability with, well, I'm going through some stuff. Love doesn't allow for that. Are you angry toward people and you feel like someone owes you? Or are you angry toward God and you feel like God owes you? Are you partial in your treatment of people? So, love, of course, in its core is selflessness. Now, in your treatment of people, someone that you respect, you treat them really well. But someone who, the 16-year-old that works at Wendy's, you might not treat as well. Love, in its selflessness, dictates that you treat that person you respect and, that lowly 16-year-old the same way. Are you demanding toward God and others? And this is really crippling. Are you losing hope or faith? Now, what if embracing love for what it is, as it's defined in 1 Corinthians 13, within your own heart, removes those emotions? What if that is a way to experience the kingdom of God within you? That doesn't mean the outside circumstances will change, just as Jesus said. It doesn't mean the kingdom of God is going to be here or there and things are going to get better. But what if the kingdom of God within you is going to cancel out those destructive emotions like jealousy and envy and anger? I would argue that embracing love is a way to experience the kingdom of God within you. And the great thing about it is it's a win-win situation. So regardless of what you're going through, as you embrace love and through that gain trust in God and gain peace in God, but also as you act out love in everyday life, you're ushering in the kingdom of God in other people's lives as well. It's just like, you guys rock. And I hear about, we gather on Sunday. It's kind of like your mantra, I guess. We gather on Sunday, and then the other 6 days of the week, we go out into our normal, ordinary, mundane life and organically bring the kingdom of God in. What if embracing love in your own heart and acting it out is organically bringing the kingdom of God into others' lives, the other 6 days of the week? So, Narrate, may you as individuals consider what you're dealing with and consider that love can help you with that situation, regardless of what the outcome is. And in that, may you also usher in the kingdom of God in other people's lives through your love and kindness.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android. For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.